The handcuffs clicked before Marcus could even finish his sentence. Cold metal. Tight. Unforgiving. "This is my house," he said. His voice shaking, chest rising too fast. "You've got the wrong man. Sir, step back." The officer snapped, gripping his arm harder. Marcus froze. His heart pounded so loud it drowned everything else. The door behind him, his door, stood open. And inside, a stranger leaned casually against the frame, arms crossed, watching like this was entertainment. Then she appeared. Renelle. Hair perfect. Face calm. Not a tear out of place. "That's him," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound real. "He's been stalking me. Please, I'm scared." The words hit harder than the cuffs. Marcus stared at her eyes wide, breath caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. "Renelle, what are you doing?" She didn't answer him. She stepped back, closer to the other man. Phones were already out. Neighbors lined the street. Someone laughed. Someone whispered. Someone said, "That's crazy." Marcus's knees weakened. His hands shook. Nobody believed him. Nobody. And as the officer pushed him down onto the pavement, Marcus realized something that made his blood run cold. The truth had already been rewritten without him. "Before we go any further, take a second and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now." I always read the comments, and it means something to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart, only to realize you were standing alone the entire time, stay with me, because this story is going to hit deeper than you expect. 2 years earlier, Marcus Reed had stood in that same doorway with a suitcase in his hand and hope sitting quietly in his chest, the kind of hope that doesn't make noise but carries weight in every decision you make. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, steady, in the way people trusted without thinking about it. And he had spent most of his life building things slowly, carefully. One honest step at a time, never rushing, never cutting corners, believing that if you did right by people, life would eventually do right by you. Renelle had stood just inside the house that morning, leaning against the wall with her arms folded, watching him with a soft smile that felt warm back then. Real back then, her voice low and gentle when she said, "You don't have to go that far for that long." And he had shaken his head with a quiet certainty, explaining again that the contract in Denver was the opportunity they had been waiting for 2 years of hard work for a payout, big enough to change everything, to pay off the mortgage, to build something stable, something lasting, something that would mean they never had to worry again. He had stepped closer to her, his hands resting lightly on her arms, his eyes searching hers for understanding, for support, for love. And she had nodded slowly, almost reluctantly, before wrapping her arms around him and whispering, "Just come back to me." Her breath warm against his neck, her fingers gripping his shirt just a little tighter than usual, as if she didn't want to let go. And in that moment, Marcus had believed her completely. The first few months had been easy in the way, distant sometimes, is when everything still feels intact. When late-night phone calls carry laughter instead of silence. When video chats stretch long into the night with small stories about nothing and everything. When she would show him the house through the camera, walking from room to room as if reminding him that it was still his. Still theirs, still waiting, and he would smile at the screen, tired from 12-hour shifts, but steady, telling her about the job site, about the long days, about the cold mornings, and the way his hands would ache by the end of each shift. But also about the numbers, the money stacking, slowly the plan unfolding, exactly the way he had promised it would. He sent money home every month without fail, sometimes more than he could afford, trusting her to manage it. Trusting her to hold things together while he was gone. Trusting that what they had built together was strong enough to stretch across distance without breaking. But somewhere around the 6th month, something shifted, not all at once. Not loud enough to name, but quiet enough to feel if you were paying attention. The calls got shorter. The laughter thinned out. The little details disappeared. When Marcus asked how her day had been, she would shrug it off with a quick same as always, her eyes drifting away from the camera, her voice distracted, like she was already somewhere else. He noticed it the first time when he told her about a bonus he had just earned, expecting her excitement, expecting that spark she used to have when they talked about the future. But she only nodded and said, "That's good." Her tone flat. Her expression unreadable, and something in his chest tightened just slightly. Not pain exactly, but a question that didn't yet have words. "Everything okay?" he had asked, leaning closer to the screen, searching her face. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, too quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her fingers trembling just a little before she lowered her hand, forcing a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just tired. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. So he nodded, letting it go, telling himself that distance does strange things to people, that stress changes the way we speak, that 2 years was a long time and they were both just adjusting in their own way, but the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have, stretching between them in a way that made him feel, for the first time, just a little alone. By the 9th month, the video calls became less frequent. She said the internet was acting up. She said she was busy. She said she had errands, appointments, things she needed to handle. Marcus accepted every explanation, without pushing, without questioning, because that was who he was, a man who gave trust freely and expected honesty in return, a man who believed that love didn't need to be monitored or managed like a transaction. He worked harder instead, pouring himself into the job, telling himself that the sooner he finished the contract, the sooner he could come home, the sooner everything would feel normal again, the sooner that quiet distance would disappear. But there were moments, small ones, that stayed with him. Longer than they should have, moments that returned at night when the work was done and the room was too quiet. Once during a call, he heard a man's voice in the background, low and unfamiliar, just a few words before the line went silent. And when he asked about it, Renelle laughed it off quickly, saying it was the television, saying he was imagining things, her tone light, but her eyes sharp for just a second before she looked away. Another time she ended a call abruptly, saying she had to go. Her voice rushed, her breathing uneven, and when he tried to call back, she didn't answer until hours later, texting him instead with a simple "fell asleep." Talk tomorrow, and something about the message felt off, but he couldn't explain why, couldn't prove anything, couldn't point to a single moment and say, "This is where it changed." The money kept moving, though. Month after month, Marcus sent it home, trusting her to handle everything, trusting her to keep the house running, the bills paid, the future secure. He imagined her walking through the rooms, planning renovations, thinking about the life they would build when he returned. And that image carried him through the long days, through the exhaustion, through the nights when the silence felt too loud. He held onto that image the way a person holds onto something fragile, careful not to question it too closely in case it broke. By the time the second year began, the calls had become routine, short check-ins that felt more like obligations than conversations. Her voice distant, his words measured, both of them moving through the motions without acknowledging the space that had grown between them. Marcus told himself it was temporary, that everything would reset once he came home. That distance had a way of distorting things that would return to normal once they were face to face again. Once he could look into her eyes without a screen between them. Once he could stand in that house and feel it around him again. He didn't know that while he was counting days, someone else was counting opportunities, that while he was building a future, someone else was quietly dismantling it, piece by piece, that the house he saw in his mind every night was no longer the same house waiting for him, no longer the place he had left behind, no longer the place he would return to. And as Marcus zipped up his suitcase for the last time, his hands steady his heart, carrying a quiet anticipation that felt almost like relief. He had no idea that the moment he stepped back onto that street, nothing would be where he left it. Nothing would be what he remembered, and the woman he trusted more than anyone else in the world had already chosen a different life. The first time Trevin Okafor stepped into Marcus's house, he didn't knock. He stood on the porch for a moment, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored shirt, glancing at his reflection in the glass of the front window, like a man preparing for something important, something deliberate. And when Renelle opened the door, she didn't look surprised to see him there. She smiled. Not the soft, familiar smile Marcus used to know, but something sharper, more controlled, the kind of smile that already knew how the story would end. "You came," she said, stepping aside. "Of course I did," Trevin replied smoothly, his voice low, confident, his eyes moving past her into the house, as if he already belonged there. Nobody spoke for a second. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, not uncertain, but full of something unspoken, something that had already been decided long before this moment. Then Renelle closed the door behind him. At first it was simple, small, easy to ignore if you weren't looking closely. Trevin came by to help. That was the word she used when she explained it to Marcus weeks later over the phone, her tone light, almost casual. "Just a friend from work," she said, brushing it off quickly, as if it didn't matter, as if it wasn't worth a second thought. "He fixes things around the house." "You know I'm not good with that stuff." Marcus had nodded on the other end of the line, his fingers tightening slightly around his phone, a small physical reaction he didn't even notice. "That's fine," he said, keeping his voice steady, calm, the way he always did. "As long as you're okay, I'm fine," she answered quickly. Too quickly. At first, Trevin stayed for an hour, then 2, then entire afternoons. He moved through the house with a familiarity that didn't belong to him, touching things, adjusting things, commenting on things like he had a say, like his opinion carried weight. Renelle watched him, listened to him, laughed at his jokes in a way she hadn't laughed in months. Her body relaxed, her voice warmer, lighter, like something inside her had been waiting for this shift. One evening, as the sun dipped low outside the kitchen window, Trevin leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her move around the room. "You really live here alone?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "For now," Renelle replied, not looking at him, her hands busy with nothing in particular, just needing something to do. "And he's gone for how long? 2 years?" Trevin let out a low whistle, shaking his head slowly. "That's a long time to leave a house, and everything in it." Renelle paused, just for a second. Her fingers stilled against the edge of the counter, her shoulders tightening slightly before she forced herself to relax. "He's working," she said. "Yeah." Trevin nodded, pushing off the counter, stepping closer, his voice dropping just enough to shift the tone of the room. "Working. While you're here holding everything down." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. And something changed. Not all at once. Not loudly. But enough. "You don't know what it's like," she said quietly, her voice carrying a hint of something sharper now, something that had been building under the surface for a long time. "Everything falls on me. The house, the bills, the stress, all of it." Trevin tilted his head slightly, studying her face. "Sounds like you're doing his job for him." The words landed differently than they should have. Renelle didn't argue. She didn't correct him. She didn't defend Marcus the way she used to. Instead, she looked away. That was the moment. Small, quiet, almost invisible. But it was the moment everything shifted. From then on, Trevin stopped being a visitor. He became part of the routine, He started leaving things behind: a jacket draped over the back of a chair, a pair of shoes by the door, a watch on the kitchen counter, like he planned to come back for it later, like he expected the space to remember him. Renelle didn't move those things. She didn't question them. She stepped around them, adjusted to them, accepted them. Weeks passed, then months. And somewhere in that time, the lines blurred completely. "Why are you still sending him money?" Trevin asked one night, sitting on the couch with his feet up, flipping through channels on Marcus's television like it was his own. Renelle stood across the room, arms folded, her expression tight, conflicted in a way she couldn't quite hide. "It's our money," she said. Trevin laughed, not loudly, not harshly, just enough to sting. "Our money? He's not even here. You think he'd do the same for you if the roles were reversed?" She didn't answer, because somewhere deep down, she didn't know. "You're carrying everything." Trevin continued, sitting up now, leaning forward, his eyes locked on hers. "And for what? So he can come back and act like he built it all himself. That's exactly what it is." He cut in smoothly, not raising his voice, not needing to. "You're the one here. You're the one making it work. That house, that life, that's yours." The word lingered in the air. Yours. Renelle swallowed her throat, tightening, her heart beating faster in her chest. Not from fear, but from something more dangerous: possibility. The idea didn't feel wrong. Not anymore. It felt justified. From that point on, the conversations changed. They weren't just talking about Marcus. They were planning around him. At first it was subtle. Adjusting bills, moving money between accounts. Renelle knew Marcus's routines, his passwords, the way he handled finances. She had always been part of that system, trusted completely. And now she used that trust like a tool, quietly redirecting funds, shifting balances, testing limits, to see what she could get away with without raising suspicion. "Slow," Trevin advised one night, standing behind her as she sat at the laptop, his hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. "Don't rush it. You want this to look clean." "I know what I'm doing," she replied, her voice steady, her fingers moving with careful precision. "I'm sure you do," he said, a slight smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "That's why I'm here." She didn't question that statement. She accepted it. Months passed and the changes became bolder. Documents were requested. Forms were filled out. Signatures, Marcus's signatures, appeared where they needed to, practiced enough times until they looked real, convincing, unquestionable. Renelle studied his handwriting late at night, her hand moving slowly across blank pages, repeating the same motion over and over until it felt natural, until it felt like second nature. At some point, it stopped feeling like theft. It started feeling like correction. "He left," she said once, her voice sharp, defensive, as if arguing with something inside herself. "He chose to leave." "And you chose to stay," Trevin replied calmly. "You earned this." The words settled into her mind, reshaping the narrative, rewriting the truth in a way that made everything easier to justify, easier to accept. By the time the first year passed, Trevin wasn't just staying late. He was staying over. Then he stopped leaving altogether. His clothes filled the closet. His presence filled the house. His voice echoed in rooms that used to belong to Marcus, replacing old memories with new ones, louder ones, more immediate ones. Renelle adjusted quickly, seamlessly, as if this had always been the plan, as if Marcus's absence had simply created space for something better. Something more real. At least that's what she told herself. But even as she moved through the house with growing confidence, with a sense of control that felt almost intoxicating, there was one thing she never fully got rid of: the tension. The quiet, underlying awareness that everything they were building rested on a lie that hadn't been tested yet. a story that hadn't been challenged, a truth that only existed because Marcus wasn't there to question it. And one night, as they sat together in the living room, the lights low, the air thick with unspoken thoughts, Trevin leaned back and said the words that turned everything from risky to irreversible. "What happens?" he asked slowly, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, "when he comes back?" Renelle didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened around the glass in her hand. Her heart skipped once, then again. Finally, she looked at him. "He won't," she said, but the slight tremble in her voice said something else. Something neither of them wanted to face yet. Because deep down, they both knew he was coming back. And when he did, their story would have to become something much bigger than a lie. By the beginning of the second year, the house no longer remembered Marcus. Not in the way it used to. The photos were gone first. Not all at once, not in a way that would feel dramatic, but slowly, piece by piece, as if they had simply lost their place over time. The framed picture from their anniversary, Marcus smiling, Renelle leaning into him, disappeared from the hallway. The small photo on the kitchen shelf, the one where they were laughing over burnt pancakes, vanished next. Even the one by the front door, the one Marcus always glanced at before leaving the house, was replaced by something neutral. Something empty, something that didn't ask questions, Trevin noticed. "You're cleaning up," he said one afternoon, leaning against the doorway, as Renelle carefully packed another box, her movements precise, controlled. "I'm making space," she replied without looking at him. "For what? For what's next?" The answer was simple, too simple. But Trevin smiled anyway, because he understood. The next step wasn't emotional. It was legal. Renelle sat at the dining table that night, a stack of papers spread in front of her. Her fingers resting lightly on the top page, her breathing slow, steady, as if she were about to do something routine, something ordinary. But her heart told a different story. It beat harder, faster, pressing against her chest, like it was trying to warn her. "You sure about this?" Trevin asked, standing behind her. His voice calm, but his eyes sharp, watching every move she made. Renelle didn't look up. "It's already done," she said. Not entirely true, but close enough. The first document was a property adjustment filing. The kind that most people wouldn't understand without legal training layered in language that blurred ownership and responsibility, that shifted control without making it obvious. Marcus's name was still there, but diminished, buried under clauses and conditions that transferred operational authority entirely to Renelle. The second document went further. It redefined the living arrangement. It positioned Marcus not as the primary resident, but as someone temporarily absent, someone whose claim weakened with time, someone whose presence could be legally questioned if he returned under the wrong conditions. And the third document, that one was the most dangerous. It introduced a narrative. Marcus Reed, unstable, unpredictable, emotionally volatile. Not directly, not loudly, but enough. Enough for a future claim. Enough for a future defense. Enough to make people hesitate before believing him. Renelle's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. Just a small shake, barely noticeable. But it was there. "You can stop," Trevin said, quietly watching her. She paused. For 1 second. Her mind flickered images of Marcus, the way he used to look at her. The way he trusted her without hesitation. The way he believed in her completely. For a moment, her chest tightened, her throat closing slightly, as something close to guilt rose up, unexpected, unwelcome. Then Trevin stepped closer. "You didn't start this," he said softly, his voice low, controlled, guiding. "He did. He left. He chose that." The words wrapped around her thoughts, reshaping them, redirecting them. Her grip on the pen steadied. and she signed. The ink dried quickly, too quickly. And just like that, the story shifted. But changing paper wasn't enough. They needed witnesses, not people who knew the truth, people who believed the lie. It started with the neighbors. Renelle adjusted her behavior carefully, deliberately, the way someone prepares for an audience without announcing it. She spoke louder when she was outside, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard. She mentioned Marcus in passing, always with the same tone, tired, strained, patient. "He's been going through something," she said one afternoon to a woman across the street. Her arms folded, her expression concerned, but controlled. I hope he gets help." The neighbor nodded slowly, her eyes soft with sympathy. "That's hard," she said. Renelle gave a small, grateful smile. "I'm managing." Managing. The word stuck. It painted her as strong, as resilient, as someone holding things together while someone else fell apart. Trevin watched these interactions from a distance, leaning casually against the car. His presence visible but not central, just enough to be recognized as part of the household, as someone who belonged there without needing explanation. "Keep it consistent," he told her later that evening. "Same story, same tone. People don't question what feels familiar." "I know," she replied, her voice calm. And she did. Over the next few weeks, the narrative spread quietly, naturally, like something that had always been there. Neighbors exchanged glances when Marcus's name came up. Conversations shifted slightly when his absence was mentioned. Concern replaced curiosity. Nobody asked too many questions, because the answers were already being given. Even the mail changed. Bills that used to carry Marcus's name arrived addressed solely to Renelle. Official letters followed the same pattern. Notifications, confirmations, subtle adjustments that reinforced the shift in ownership, the slow erasure of Marcus's presence from the legal structure of the house. One afternoon, Renelle stood at the mailbox flipping through a stack of envelopes, her fingers pausing when she saw it. A letter addressed to Marcus. Her chest tightened. Just for a second, she stared at his name printed cleanly across the front, her eyes tracing the letters slowly, as if they belonged to someone she used to know. "Something wrong?" Trevin asked, stepping up behind her. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No." Without another word, she tore the envelope in half. Then again, and again. The pieces fell into the trash can beside the mailbox. Gone. Just like that. Trevin watched her carefully, a slight smile forming on his lips. "You're getting better at this," he said. Renelle didn't respond, but her silence said enough. Inside the house, the transformation was complete. Marcus's belongings had been reduced, boxed, moved, stored out of sight, out of mind. The closet held Trevin's clothes, now sharp, tailored, deliberate. The living room reflected his taste, his presence, his control. Even the scent of the house had changed, subtle but noticeable, no longer carrying the familiar warmth Marcus had left behind. It felt different, new, owned. And yet there was something underneath it all. Something quiet, something waiting. Late one night, as Renelle stood alone in the kitchen, the house completely still around her, she felt it again, that tension, that small, persistent unease that refused to disappear, no matter how much she adjusted, no matter how much she convinced herself that everything was under control. Her hands rested on the counter, her breathing slow, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened window. For a moment she looked unsure. Just for a moment. Then she straightened, turned away, and walked back toward the living room where Trevin sat, waiting, completely at ease, completely certain, as if the outcome had never been in question. "What?" he asked, noticing the slight change in her expression. Nothing, she said quickly, her voice steady again. But deep down, somewhere, she didn't want to look. She felt it. The truth pressing quietly against the edges of the lie they had built. Because no matter how carefully they planned, no matter how clean the paperwork looked, no matter how many people believed their version of the story, there was one thing they couldn't control: Marcus, and the moment he stepped back into that street. Everything they had rewritten would be tested. The pavement was still warm from the afternoon sun, but Marcus couldn't feel it. He sat on the curb across the street from his own house. His house, and stared at the front door like it might suddenly recognize him again, like something inside those walls might remember who he was and correct the mistake that had just happened in front of everyone. His hands rested loosely on his knees, but they weren't still. They were shaking. Not violently, not enough for anyone passing by to stop and ask if he was okay, but enough for him to feel it in his bones, a quiet tremor that refused to settle. His chest felt tight. Too tight. Like every breath had to fight its way in. He replayed the moment over and over, every word, every look, every second of it, trying to find the place where it made sense, the point where something could be explained, fixed, undone. But there was nothing. Just Renelle's voice, soft, scared, controlled, calling him a stranger, calling him a threat, and the look on her face when she said it, that calm, distant certainty that didn't belong to the woman he thought he knew. How do you erase somebody like that? He whispered to himself, his voice barely audible, his eyes fixed on the house. No answer came. Cars passed. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Life moved around him like nothing had happened. And that was the part that hurt the most. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked. Nobody cared. Marcus lowered his head, his fingers tightening slowly into fists, his knuckles turning pale as something deeper than confusion began to settle in his chest. Not just pain, not just shock, something heavier. Betrayal, complete, unquestionable, final. Don't sit there too long. The voice came from behind him, low and steady, carrying the weight of someone who had been watching longer than they let on. Marcus turned slowly. An older woman stood a few feet away. Her posture straight, despite her age, her silver hair pulled back neatly. Her eyes sharp in a way that made it clear she missed very little. She held a small paper bag in one hand, her other hand resting lightly against her side as if she didn't need anything else to steady herself. Miss Beulah Gaines. Marcus recognized her immediately. She had lived 2 houses down for as long as he could remember, always on her porch in the evenings, always watching the street like it was a story unfolding in front of her. "You okay, baby?" she asked softly. Marcus let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Do I look okay?" he replied, his voice rough, his throat tight. Miss Beulah studied him for a moment, her eyes moving over his face, his posture, the way his hands still trembled slightly, even though he was trying to hide it. "No," she said simply. Nobody spoke for a second. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, not forced, but heavy with everything that didn't need to be said out loud. Then she stepped closer. "You hungry?" she asked, holding out the paper bag. Marcus hesitated, his stomach twisted slightly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since early morning, but it wasn't just hunger he was dealing with. It was everything else layered on top of it, making even simple decisions feel heavier than they should. "I'm not take it," she interrupted gently, placing the bag in his hands before he could finish. "You don't think right on an empty stomach." Her tone left no room for argument. Marcus looked down at the bag for a moment, then back up at her. His eyes searching her face, trying to understand why she was the only person who had walked toward him instead of away. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. Miss Beulah didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the house, then back at him. "Because I know what I saw," she said. Marcus's breath caught. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice sharper, now urgency pushing through the exhaustion. She exhaled slowly, her gaze steady. "It means," she said carefully, "you're not crazy." The words hit harder than anything else had. Marcus blinked, once, then again. "You heard what she said," he replied, his voice low, uncertain now. "You saw what happened. Everybody saw it." "I saw it?" Miss Beulah nodded. "But I also saw everything before that." Marcus's heart skipped. "What are you talking about?" She stepped back slightly, folding her arms, her expression tightening just a bit, as if she were weighing how much to say, how fast to say it. "I've been sitting on that porch for 32 years, she said. "You think I don't notice when a man who doesn't live in a house starts coming around every other day?" Marcus's stomach dropped. "Trevon," he said under his breath. She nodded once. "That's his name," she confirmed. "Well-dressed. Too comfortable. Walks like he owns the place." Marcus looked back at the house, his jaw tightening, his chest, rising and falling unevenly as pieces started to shift in his mind, connecting in ways he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. "How long?" he asked. Miss Beulah didn't sugarcoat it. "Over a year." The world tilted. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands gripping each other tightly, as if he needed something solid to hold on to. "That's not possible," he said, but his voice didn't carry conviction. "Not anymore." "I watched him move in," she continued calmly. "Not all at once, bit by bit. A jacket here, shoes there." Then he stopped, leaving. Marcus's chest tightened again. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, looking up at her now, something close to desperation in his eyes. "Why didn't you call me?" Miss Beulah held his gaze, "and say what she asked quietly? That your wife was letting another man into your house, that she was changing things behind your back. You would have believed me." Marcus opened his mouth, then stopped, because he knew the answer. He wouldn't have. Not then. Not without proof. Her voice softened just slightly. "I needed to be sure," she said. "Not just about what I saw, but about what they were doing." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Miss Beulah reached into her bag, slowly, deliberately, her movements careful, controlled, like she understood the weight of what she was about to do. "I don't trust people who move quiet," she said. "So I started paying attention." She pulled out a small envelope, worn, creased at the edges. She held it for a moment, then extended it toward him. Marcus stared at it, his heart pounding again, louder now, faster, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached out to take it. "What is this?" he asked. "Something you're gonna need," she replied. He opened it slowly. Inside, photos. Printed, clear, detailed. His breath caught. Trevon, inside the house. Trevon, carrying boxes. Trevon, standing in the living room. Marcus's living room like he belonged there, and Renelle standing next to him. Not distant, not uncomfortable. Close. Too close. Marcus's vision blurred slightly, his grip tightening around the photos, his chest rising sharply as the truth hit him in waves, each one heavier than the last. "This," he whispered. Miss Beulah's voice came low, steady, cutting through the noise in his head. "That ain't all," she said. Marcus looked up, his eyes wide now, something shifting behind them, something no longer just broken. Something waking up. "What else?" he asked. She held his gaze, and for the first time, there was something serious in her expression, something heavy. "I got timelines," she said quietly. "I got recordings, and I got enough to show that what they did wasn't just wrong." She paused. Let the silence sit, Then finished, it was planned. Marcus went completely still, frozen. Because suddenly this wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was something much bigger. And whatever Renelle and Trevin thought they had gotten away with was only the beginning of the truth. Marcus did not sleep that night. He tried. He lay on the narrow pull-out couch in Miss Beulah's spare room, with his hands folded over his chest, staring up at a ceiling painted the pale yellow of old quiet homes, listening to the hum of the window unit and the occasional creak of the house settling into itself. But rest would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Renelle standing in his doorway, with fear painted carefully across her face, not real fear, but something crafted, something controlled, something cruel enough to make strangers choose her side before he had even opened his mouth. Then he saw Trevin behind her, relaxed, almost amused, standing inside Marcus's life, like he had stepped into a room that had finally been prepared for him. Then he saw the neighbors, the phones raised to the eyes, watching the mouths moving. He heard again the sound of the handcuffs closing. He heard his own voice saying, "This is my house," and sounding to everyone around him like a desperate man with no proof. His throat tightened just thinking about it. His hands were cold. His chest carried that same heavy pressure, the one that made every breath feel a little too small. Around 2 in the morning, he sat up, pressed both feet to the floor, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his head lowered, his palms rubbing slowly over his face. He had been gone for 2 years. 2 years of missed dinners, missed birthdays, missed ordinary evenings in exchange for work, money, sacrifice, and a future he thought he was protecting. And now that future looked like smoke. He whispered into the dark, not even sure who he was talking to anymore. "How much did I miss?" The silence answered him the way silence often does. Completely. By morning he looked older. Not in the face exactly, but in the way hurt rearranges posture. He sat at Miss Beulah's small kitchen table while she poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug and set down 2 slices of toast he had no appetite for. The early light came in soft, through the blinds, laying thin stripes over the table over his hands, over the envelope of photos and notes Miss Beulah had placed between them the night before. He had gone through all of it twice. Dates, times, printed stills from her old porch camera, notes in her careful handwriting, a man entering his home in the afternoon, the same man leaving the next morning, delivery receipts, utility workers turned away. One strange visit from a woman in a navy blazer carrying folders. And still, even with proof in front of him, his mind kept circling the same question. "I need to hear it from her," he said suddenly. Miss Beulah looked up from her coffee. "No," she replied. Marcus frowned. "You didn't even let me finish. I didn't need to." Her tone stayed calm, but it was the calm of someone who had already thought farther ahead than he had. "You are not going over there alone, and you are not walking up to that door hoping guilt will make liars tell the truth." His jaw tightened. "I just need her to look me in the eye." She did. Miss Beulah set her mug down, and she lied without blinking. The words landed hard because they were true. Marcus looked away, his hand curling around the mug, though he wasn't drinking from it. Heat touched his palm, but it didn't reach much deeper than that. By mid-morning, the pressure inside him had become action. Not clear action, not smart action, just movement born from humiliation. He told himself he only wanted to see the house from closer up, only wanted to think, only wanted to understand what exactly had changed. But the truth was uglier than that. He wanted proof that he still existed in that place. He wanted a look through a window, a glimpse of one familiar object, some sign that his life had not been fully replaced. Miss Beulah had warned him not to go. He waited until she went to the pharmacy, then left through the side door and walked the 3 blocks back with his shoulders tight and his heart pounding harder with every step. The street looked offensively normal. A lawn service truck idled 2 houses down. Somebody watered flowers. A child rode a scooter in slow circles on the sidewalk. Marcus slowed near his own mailbox, staring at it for a second too long. The paint was fresh. The brass numbers had been replaced, and on a small white label just beneath them was a name. R. Okafor. He stopped breathing for half a second. Then all at once, the breath came back sharp, burning. His vision narrowed. His pulse slammed in his throat. He stepped forward without thinking, pushed open the small gate, and walked up the path like anger had finally taken over the part of him that still believed in patience. He didn't knock this time. He hit the doorbell once hard, then again. The door opened almost immediately. Trevin stood there wearing Marcus's robe, not similar, not the same style. Marcus's robe, the dark gray one Renelle had given him their second winter in the house, the one with the small tear along the pocket seam from where he'd caught it on the laundry door. Trevin saw Marcus looking at it and smiled slowly, the kind of smile that lived halfway between mockery and delight. "Well," he said, leaning one shoulder against the frame, "look, who still doesn't know when to let go." Marcus stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Take that off." Trevin laughed. "Or what, take? That. Off, man." Trevin said, lowering his voice as though sharing a joke, "You've been gone too long. Things change." Marcus's hands curled into fists. His whole body had gone hot now, hot and shaking, not from fear, but from rage so intense it made the air feel thin. "Where's Renelle?" Behind Trevin, Marcus saw movement. Renelle stepped into view, slowly, arms folded, expression composed, almost bored. That hurt more than tears would have, more than panic, more than shame. She looked at him like he was an inconvenience interrupting lunch. "You need to leave," she said. Marcus stared at her. "You put his name on my mailbox." "No," she corrected coolly. "It's not your mailbox." The sentence hit with surgical precision. Trevin didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply watched Marcus absorb it, watched the humiliation travel over his face, watched his breathing lose rhythm. A curtain shifted in the house next door. Marcus didn't need to turn to know people were watching again. "I have proof," he said, but even to his own ears, the words sounded strained. "I know what you did." Renelle raised one eyebrow. "Then take it to a lawyer." "I will." "Good," she said, and took one step closer to the door. "But if you come onto this property again and threaten me, I'll press charges. Nobody threatened you. You're shouting at my door." Her voice rose just enough to carry. "You came back here after the police already warned you." There it was again. The performance. The careful public framing. Marcus turned and saw 2 neighbors on a porch pretending not to stare. A man across the street slowed his phone down from chest level. Recording. Again. Social pressure wrapped around Marcus's chest like wire. His mouth went dry. "You know this is wrong," he said quietly, looking only at Renelle now. "You know it." For the first time, something small flickered across her face. Not guilt. Not quite. More like irritation that he was still standing there, still forcing her to hear truth in public. Then it vanished. "I know you need help," she replied. He recoiled as if she had struck him. Before he could answer, Trevin pulled the door a little wider and lifted his phone. "Actually," he said, "I already called someone." Marcus turned just as the cruiser rolled up. It happened fast after that. Too fast for dignity. Too fast for explanation. The same officer from the day before stepped out with another younger officer beside him, both carrying that already decided expression Marcus now hated more than he could name. The older one approached first. "Sir," he said, "we told you not to return." Marcus held his hands out open, trying to keep his voice controlled, even though his heart was slamming so hard his chest hurt. "I live here." "No, you don't," Rennell said from the doorway before the officer could answer. The younger officer glanced at Marcus, then at the house, then back at Rennell. The social script had already been written for him. Stable woman, protective boyfriend, agitated man on porch. Easy. Marcus felt something inside him crack at the edges. "You can't keep doing this," he said. But now he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the officers, to Rennell, or to the whole street. "You can't erase me and call me crazy every time I tell the truth." The older officer stepped closer. "Lower your voice. I am telling you the truth." "Sir, my name is on Sir." That mortgage, that title, those walls, that the officer grabbed his arm. That single touch did it. Not because it hurt, because it confirmed the shape of his humiliation in front of witnesses. Marcus jerked back on instinct, and instantly the younger officer moved in. His shoulder hit the porch rail. His jaw clenched so hard he felt pain shoot up toward his temple. He wasn't fighting. He knew he wasn't. But his body was no longer calm enough to look harmless. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting hands where I can see them." "I'm not doing anything." Nobody spoke. The silence said everything. And in that terrible, suspended second, Marcus saw the whole trap. Rennell in the doorway, pale and composed. Trevon behind her, hand resting lightly against the inside wall like he had all the time in the world. The neighbors, the officers, the phone cameras. Every piece of the scene arranged so that his truth looked like instability. His pain looked like danger. His rightful rage looked like proof against him. The older officer finally released him with a warning instead of an arrest. But the message was clear. One more visit. One more raised voice. One more misstep, and the system would finish what Rennell had started. Marcus stood on the sidewalk afterward, breathing hard, his arm throbbing where fingers had dug in his pride in pieces at his feet. He looked up once more at the house, and Trevon, still wearing that robe, closed the front door slowly in his face. When Miss Beulah found him 10 minutes later sitting on the curb with his head in his hands, she didn't ask what happened. She took one look and knew. She sat down beside him with more effort than she let show and waited until his breathing steadied enough to hear her. "They want you angry," she said. Marcus swallowed hard. His voice came out hoarse. "I already am. I know." She rested one hand over his fist until he loosened it. "But anger is the trap. Truth is the weapon." He laughed once, bitterly. "Truth doesn't seem to be doing much." "It will," she said. "But not if you keep showing up like a broken man begging liars to be decent." Marcus lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red now, not from tears exactly, though they were close, but from exhaustion, and the kind of pain that sits just behind the eyes and burns there. "Then what do I do?" Miss Beulah looked straight ahead at the street, at the neat lawns, at the ordinary neighborhood, holding extraordinary ugliness inside it. "You stop trying to get your life back with your hands," she said quietly. "And you start taking it back with evidence." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Something in him was still shaking. His pride, his body, his heart. But beneath all of that, something else began to settle. Not peace. Not yet. Something colder. Sharper. More useful. He nodded once. Because for the first time since coming home, Marcus Reed understood that if he kept walking toward that house as a wounded husband, he would lose everything. So he made a different decision. He stopped being the victim. The next morning, Marcus Reed did something he should have done the moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. But pain has a way of delaying logic, especially when the wound is fresh, and the betrayal still feels too personal to be real. He stopped thinking like a husband and started thinking like a man whose life had been targeted with intention. That shift did not happen dramatically. It happened quietly in Miss Beulah's kitchen, with cold coffee in his mug and a legal pad in front of him, his handwriting rough at first, then steadier, as he began listing every single thing he knew for certain instead of every emotion that kept trying to drown him. Date he returned home. Time the police arrived. Exact wording Rennell used. The name on the mailbox, the robe, the warning from the officer, the photos Miss Beulah had taken, the notes, the timelines, facts, not feelings, evidence, not heartbreak. His chest still hurt, and every time he wrote Rennell's name, his jaw tightened on instinct. But something deeper had settled inside him now. He was no longer standing in the doorway asking why. He was building a case. Miss Beulah watched him for a while, before sitting across from him with her own small notebook, the one she had carried for years. Its cover worn soft at the corners. Its pages full of dates, observations, and details most people would never think to record. "I told you I noticed things," she said, sliding it toward him. "I didn't realize how much I'd notice until I started writing them down." Marcus opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, patient, and exact. April 12th, black SUV parked overnight again. April 19th, woman in navy blazer visited at 2:16 p.m. left with signed folder. May 3rd, utility truck turned away. Trevin told them owner had changed service accounts already. July 9th, loud argument in garage, heard Rennell say, "By the time he comes back, it'll be done." Marcus stopped there. His fingers pressed harder into the page. His breathing changed. You heard that he asked, his voice low. Miss Beulah nodded. "Not all of it. Enough." He looked up at her, something like stunned gratitude breaking through the exhaustion. "Why did you keep all this?" She held his gaze without flinching. "Because lies move fast. But written truth sits still." By noon they were in the office of an attorney named Dana Holloway, a black woman in her early 40s with a calm face, sharp eyes, and the kind of stillness that made people stop wasting her time. Her office sat on the 8th floor of a brick building downtown. Not flashy, not trying to impress anyone with marble or glass, but orderly, polished, and unmistakably competent. Marcus sat across from her in a chair that suddenly made him feel aware of everything, his sleep-starved eyes, the bruise still faintly darkening near his wrist, where the officer had grabbed him, the stiffness in his shoulders, the shame that had not fully left his body, even though he had decided not to let it lead anymore. Dana listened without interrupting while he walked her through what had happened. Her fingers steepled her expression unreadable, except for the occasional narrowing of her eyes when a detail landed where it shouldn't have. When he finished, the room fell quiet for a moment. Dana looked at the photos first, then at Miss Beulah's notebook, then at the warning notice Marcus had written down from memory. Finally, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. "You have two separate problems," she said. "The emotional one and the legal one. The emotional one is obvious. The legal one is what matters now." Marcus nodded once. "I need my house back." Dana lifted one finger slightly. "You need more than that. You need the truth of ownership established cleanly before they lock you into a pattern that makes you look unstable. Right now, from the outside, they have appearance. Residence, a rehearsed story, law enforcement familiarity, and likely paperwork designed to muddy your claim. Appearance wins in the short term. Documents win in court. She paused, then looked directly at him. Did you ever place the property in any special structure? Trust holding company, protected title arrangement, inheritance shield? Marcus blinked, surprised by the question. My father insisted on a trust when I bought it, he said slowly. Said it would protect the house if anything ever happened to me on the road. I signed papers with his lawyer before we closed. Rennell knew it existed, but I handled all that through the attorney. I never thought. Dana's eyes sharpened. Who was the trustee? Marcus said. And if I was unavailable, a secondary administrative review kicked in through the firm that set it up. Dana leaned forward now, the first clear sign that something had shifted. Good, she said. Very good. Because if title transfer or control documents were altered without satisfying the trust provisions, then what they've built may be smoke. Marcus went still. For the first time in days, the pressure in his chest changed shape. It did not disappear, but it moved, becoming less like suffocation and more like focus. So she may not actually own it. Dana shook her head slightly. Not if the trust wasn't lawfully penetrated. And these things are designed specifically, so a spouse can't casually rewrite ownership with surface-level filings or forged signatures. We need the original trust documents, the deed history, any modification attempts, and every filing attached to the property in the last 24 months. She turned to her assistant and began issuing instructions with clipped precision. Property records, trust formation packet, any administrative change notices, financial filings tied to resident status, emergency title alerts. Marcus listened, stunned by how quickly helplessness could begin to turn into structure when the right person entered the room. But that was not the only shift. Dana also asked for phone records, bank statements, transfer history, and any messages Marcus still had from Rennell over the 2 years he was away. At first he frowned, unsure how a half-dead marriage conversation log could matter compared to forged property claims. Dana explained without softness, but not without care. Patterns tell stories. If she was slowly cutting emotional contact, while financial transfers remained active, that supports intent. If there were changes in account behavior, service address, changes, unauthorized payments, or false residency declarations, those matter. Fraud is rarely one act. It's choreography. The word hung in the room. Choreography. Marcus looked down at his hands. For months he had thought he was enduring distance. Now he was starting to understand he had been managed. By late afternoon, the first crucial document came in by secure email, and Dana printed it without ceremony. She set the packet in front of Marcus and tapped the second page with one manicured nail. Read this part. His eyes scanned the legal language slowly, then stopped. The property had indeed been purchased through a residential protective trust established in his name alone. Any permanent transfer, occupancy reassignment, or beneficial control modification required either his notarized in-person execution through the original firm or a verified incapacity review approved by the trust administrator. Marcus looked up. I never did any of that. Dana nodded. I know. She turned the page. Attached behind it was a copy of a recent filing attempt. Rennell had submitted change documents 6 months earlier. The filing had been received partially processed through county intake, then flagged for review, because the trust reference numbers did not align. It had not fully vested. It had simply created confusion at the county level, enough confusion to generate surface records that looked persuasive to people who didn't read deeply, including neighbors, patrol officers, and maybe even a lesser attorney. But legally, it was unstable. Marcus stared at the page, then at Dana, then back at the page. His heart beat harder now, not from fear, but from the first sharp edge of hope. so the house is still mine." Dana did not smile, but there was something almost satisfied in the steadiness of her voice. "The house appears to still be protected under your trust, which means if she presented herself as owner and used those documents to remove you socially, financially, or through law enforcement framing, she was not just being cruel. She may have committed fraud." Miss Beulah, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, let out a slow breath through her nose. "I knew that girl was wicked," she murmured. "I just didn't know how expensive her wickedness was." Marcus should have felt relief. Instead, what came first was rage, clean and cold. Not the helpless rage from the porch. Not the kind that made his hands shake uselessly in front of police. This was different. This was the kind that tightens a person from the spine outward. The kind that says they planned this carefully, and now we will answer carefully. He looked at Dana. "What's next?" She slid another sheet toward him. "Next, we establish control of the real record. Then we file emergency notice to prevent further tampering. Then we prepare civil action. But before any of that becomes decisive, I want the strongest possible proof of intent. And for that, your witness," she nodded toward Miss Beulah, "may have just become the most important person in this whole case." Miss Beulah lifted her chin slightly. "I got more than notes." Marcus turned to her. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small flash drive black plane no larger than a thumb joint. She set it on Dana's desk. "My porch camera records audio when the wind is low," she said. "Not every night. But enough nights. And one of those nights they were in the garage with the side door cracked. Thought they were alone." Dana looked from the drive to Miss Beulah, suddenly very attentive. "What's on it?" Miss Beulah held Marcus's gaze when she answered. "Your wife's voice," she said quietly. "And the man living in your house. Talking about the trust. Talking about how they had to make you look unstable before you came back." The room went silent. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face, then rush back all at once. His fingers curled against the edge of the chair. His chest tightened, but not in pain this time. In recognition. In arrival. In the terrible, clarifying moment when betrayal stops being suspicion and becomes documented fact. Dana reached for the flash drive without breaking eye contact with either of them. And suddenly she said almost to herself, the story begins to flip. The courtroom felt colder than it should have. Not because of the air conditioning, because of the silence. It was the kind of silence that pressed down on people, made them sit straighter, breathe slower, choose their words more carefully. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands resting flat against the wood fingers, slightly curled, not shaking anymore, but still carrying the memory of it. His chest tight in a different way now, not from confusion, not from helplessness, but from the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Across from him, Renelle sat beside her attorney, posture, perfect expression, composed, dressed in soft colors that made her look smaller, softer, harmless. Trevin sat just behind her shoulders, relaxed eyes moving slowly around the room, like a man who believed he understood how all of this would end. Marcus noticed something immediately. Neither of them looked at him. Not once. Dana Holloway leaned in slightly, her voice low-controlled. "Stay steady," she said. "Let them talk first." Marcus nodded once, his heart beat slower now. Deliberate, measured, because this wasn't his stage anymore. It was theirs, and they were about to step into it. Renelle's attorney stood first, adjusting his jacket, clearing his throat. His voice smooth, practiced, confident, in the way men sound when they believe the surface of a story will hold. "Your Honor." He began pacing slowly. "This is a case of a man who has been absent for 2 years, returning suddenly and aggressively to a residence that has been maintained solely by my client. During that time, she has endured emotional stress, financial instability, and repeated attempts at contact that became concerning. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't move. Mr. Reed. The attorney continued gesturing lightly toward Marcus without looking directly at him, has exhibited behavior that has caused fear. There is documentation of police involvement, witness accounts from neighbors, and evidence that my client has taken necessary steps to protect herself. Renelle lowered her gaze at the right moment, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her breathing slowed just enough to look controlled. Perfect. Everything about it was perfect, except for one thing. It wasn't real. Dana didn't interrupt. She didn't object. She let it unfold, because this part mattered. The judge nodded slightly, then looked toward Dana. Counsel Dana stood slowly. No rush, no performance, just presence, Your Honor. She said, her voice calm but firm. What you've just heard is a story. She paused. Let the words sit. Now I'd like to show you the truth. The room shifted. Not loudly, but enough. Dana walked to the evidence table and picked up a folder, flipping it open with practiced ease. Let's begin with the property, she said, turning toward the judge. The residence in question is not owned in the way opposing counsel has described. It is held under a protective trust established solely in Mr. Reed's name. Any attempt to alter ownership or control requires specific legal procedures that were not followed. She handed a document to the court clerk, who passed it forward. The judge scanned it briefly. Then again. His expression changed. Slightly. That alone, Dana continued, invalidates any claim of lawful transfer presented by Ms. Reed. Renelle's fingers tightened in her lap. Just a little. Trevin shifted in his seat, barely noticeable. But it was there. Dana didn't stop. She moved to the next piece. Now let's address intent. She placed a small black flash drive on the table. The same one Miss Beulah had handed over. Marcus felt his chest tighten again. Not from fear, from anticipation. Dana nodded toward the technician. Play the file. The room held its breath. A soft click. Then audio, faint at first. Wind, a distant car. Then voices. Renelle's voice. Clear, undeniable. He won't question it right away. He trusts too much. Marcus's stomach dropped, even though he already knew, even though he had been told. Hearing it was different. Trevin's voice followed low, amused. Yeah, but once he comes back, we need the story tight. You already started planning it with the neighbors. A pause. Then Renelle again. Yes, they think he's unstable. It's already working. The courtroom went still, completely still. No one moved. No one breathed. And the trust, Trevin asked. Renelle exhaled slowly. I filed what I could. It's messy, but it creates enough confusion. By the time he tries to fix it, he'll already look like the problem. Marcus's hands pressed harder into the table. His knuckles turned white. His chest rose sharply. But he didn't speak. He didn't move. Because this was the moment. The silence stretched. Heavy, unavoidable. Then Dana's voice cut through it. Your Honor, she said quietly. This is not a misunderstanding. This is not fear. This is a coordinated effort to defraud, manipulate public perception, and unlawfully seize property. She turned slightly. Just enough. Planned, executed, and documented. The word echoed. Documented. The judge leaned back slowly, his eyes now fixed on Renelle. For the first time, Renelle looked up, and for the first time, she didn't look in control. Her lips parted slightly. Her breathing changed, small, but visible. Trevin leaned forward, whispering something urgently to his attorney. Too late. The damage had already been done. Dana stepped back. No more words, no more explanation. She didn't need them, because the truth was sitting in the room now, loud, clear, unavoidable. Marcus exhaled slowly, his chest finally loosening just a fraction. His eyes still locked on Renelle, not with anger anymore, not even with pain, but with something deeper. Finality, because whatever story she had built, whatever version of him she had tried to erase, was gone. And as the judge leaned forward, his voice measured but firm, everyone in that room knew nothing would ever go back to the way it was. The judge didn't speak right away. He leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed lightly together, eyes moving slowly from the transcript in front of him to Renelle, then to Trevon, then finally to Marcus. The courtroom held its breath again, but this time it wasn't the tense, uncertain silence from earlier. This silence was different, heavier, sharper, like something had already been decided, and everyone was just waiting for it to be said out loud. Renelle shifted in her seat, just slightly. Her fingers were no longer still. They were clasped too tightly now, the knuckles faintly pale, her breathing no longer smooth her chest, rising just a little faster than before. Trevon leaned closer to his attorney, whispering again, but the confidence that had been sitting comfortably on his shoulders since the beginning was gone now. It had slipped, cracked, and everyone could see it. Marcus didn't move, not even a little. His hands rested on the table, steady, now grounded in something that had replaced the chaos from before. The shaking was gone. The doubt was gone. What remained was something quiet and controlled. Truth. And it didn't need to fight anymore. The judge finally spoke. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that filled the room, "you presented yourself as a victim." Renelle swallowed. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The judge continued, his tone unchanged. "You claimed fear. You claimed instability on the part of your husband. You allowed law enforcement to act on that claim." A pause. Long enough for the words to settle. However, he added, lifting the document slightly, "The evidence presented contradicts that narrative in a clear and deliberate way." Renelle's composure broke just a little more. Her eyes shifted. Her shoulders tightened. Her voice came out low, almost desperate. "Your Honor, that recording is admissible." The judge cut in smoothly, not raising his voice, not needing to. "And it is supported by documentation, timelines, and witness testimony that establish intent." Intent. The word landed hard. Final. Trevon sat back slowly, his jaw tightening, his eyes darkening, as he realized piece by piece that the structure they had built, every careful lie, every planted story, every calculated move, was collapsing under the weight of something they hadn't accounted for. Proof. The judge turned a page, then another, then looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Reed," he said, "this court recognizes your legal ownership of the property in question under the established trust." Marcus exhaled, slow, controlled, but his chest still tightened just slightly, as if part of him had been bracing for the opposite, for disappointment, for one more moment of injustice. It didn't come. The attempted alterations to that ownership, the judge continued, were incomplete, improperly filed, and appear to have been executed under false pretenses. Renelle shook her head now more noticeably. "That's not Ms. Reed," the judge said firmly. "You will remain silent." Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Then, the final shift. "Based on the evidence before this court," the judge said, his voice steady, deliberate, "I am referring this matter for criminal investigation." The room reacted, not loudly, but enough. A ripple. A shift. Someone gasped softly in the back. Renelle froze, completely. Her face drained of color, her eyes widening, her breath catching in her throat, as the reality of what was happening finally broke through the last layer of denial she had been holding on to. "No," she whispered, barely audible. Trevin sat forward suddenly. "Your Honor, that's sit down," the judge said. And he did. Because for the first time he didn't have control. The judge continued. "This includes potential charges of fraud, misrepresentation, and unlawful manipulation of property records, as well as false reporting to law enforcement." Each word felt like a hammer, precise, unavoidable. Renelle's shoulders began to shake now, subtle at first, then more. Her hands moved, reaching for something, anything, but finding nothing to hold on to. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered under her breath, the words slipping out without permission, without control. Marcus heard it, and for a moment, just a moment, something old stirred in his chest. Not love, not anymore, but the memory of it. Then it faded, gone. Because what stood in front of him now wasn't the woman he had left 2 years ago. It was the truth of who she had chosen to become. The judge wasn't finished. Additionally, he said the court is granting immediate restoration of residence rights to Mr. Reed. Any continued occupancy by unauthorized individuals is to cease immediately. Trevin's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto Marcus now for the first time. No smile, no arrogance, just something darker, something closer to fear. "You have 24 hours," the judge added, "to vacate the property." The words echoed. Final. Trevin leaned back slowly, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack under the pressure. His hands gripped the edge of his seat, his entire posture rigid, controlled only by the thin thread of restraint that kept him from reacting the way he wanted to. Renelle didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. Because everything she had built was gone. Just like that. The judge closed the file. "This matter is concluded." The gavel didn't need to hit hard. The sound still cut through the room like a blade. Marcus sat there for a moment longer, his body still, his mind catching up to what had just happened, the weight of it settling slowly, piece by piece, until it finally reached his chest and released something he hadn't realized he had been holding. A breath. Deep. Real. His hands relaxed. His shoulders lowered. And when he stood, he didn't rush. Didn't look back immediately. He simply gathered his things, his movements calm, controlled, deliberate. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about truth. And truth didn't need to celebrate. It just needed to stand. As he turned to leave, his eyes met Renelle's for the first time since the verdict. Tears had finally come. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet streams down her face, her expression shattered, her composure gone. "Marcus," she whispered. He stopped. Just for a second, the room held its breath again. But he didn't step closer, didn't speak, didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. And as he turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving her sitting there broken, exposed, and finally seen for what she was, everyone in that room understood something clearly. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been earned. The house was quiet when Marcus walked back in. Not the kind of quiet that comes from absence, the kind that comes after something ends. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and for a moment, he didn't move. He just stood there in the entryway, his hand still resting on the handle, his chest rising slowly, his eyes scanning the space in front of him like he was seeing it for the first time and remembering it at the same time. The walls were the same. The floors were the same. The light coming through the front window fell across the living room, in that familiar angle he had watched for years. But something had changed, or maybe something had been revealed. Trevin was gone. His clothes, his shoes, his presence erased as quickly as it had appeared. The closet stood half empty now, the air inside carrying only the faintest trace of a scent that would fade with time. Rennell's things were gone too. Not everything, but enough to make it clear she had been removed not just physically, but from the life she had tried to rewrite. Marcus stepped forward slowly, each footfall, deliberate his hand, brushing lightly against the back of the couch as he moved deeper into the room. His fingers paused where the fabric changed texture, right where the tear used to be the one he had never gotten around to fixing. It was still there. Small, unimportant, but real. He exhaled softly, his shoulders lowering just a little more as something settled inside him, something that hadn't been there before. Peace. Not the kind that erases pain, the kind that sits beside it and says it's over. He walked into the kitchen next. The counter was clean, the surfaces bare, the small details stripped back to something neutral, something that didn't belong to anyone yet. He rested both hands against the edge of the counter, leaning forward slightly, his head lowering for a second as his eyes closed. 2 years. 2 years of work, of distance, of believing. And all of it had led here. He didn't feel anger anymore, not in the way he expected. What he felt instead was clarity. Rennell hadn't just made a mistake, she had made a choice, and so had he. The difference was his choice had been built on love. Hers had been built on something else entirely. Marcus straightened slowly, his jaw tightening just a fraction, before relaxing again, his breathing steady, now controlled. He turned toward the hallway, his steps quieter, as he moved past the rooms that once held versions of his life he no longer needed to revisit. The bedroom door stood open. Inside, the space felt unfamiliar, not because of what had been added, but because of what had been removed. He didn't step inside. Not yet. Some things didn't need to be reclaimed immediately. Some things needed time. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Marcus opened it to find Miss Beulah standing there, her posture the same as always, her expression calm, but her eyes searching his face carefully, as if she needed to confirm something for herself. "You still standing?" she asked. Marcus let out a small breath that almost turned into a smile. "I am now," he said. She nodded once, satisfied, then stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, setting a small container on the kitchen counter, like she had done 100 times before. "Food," she said simply. "You don't rebuild on an empty stomach." Marcus looked at the container, then back at her, something warm settling in his chest, now something grounded. Something real. "Thank you," he said quietly. She waved it off. "Don't thank me. Just don't forget what got you here." He didn't. He couldn't. That night, Marcus sat on the back porch, the city stretching out quietly in front of him. The air cooler, now the weight of the past few days, finally settling into something he could carry. His hands rested on his knees, his posture relaxed, his breathing steady, as he looked out at the lights in the distance. Alone. But not the same kind of alone he had felt before. This was different. This was chosen. And that made all the difference. He thought about everything that had happened, every moment, every lie, every truth that had surfaced when it mattered most. He thought about trust, how easily it had been given, how deeply it had been broken, and how carefully it would need to be rebuilt, not just with others, but within himself. Because the truth was, love without respect is not love. Trust without awareness is not strength, and silence when truth is needed only protects the wrong people. Marcus leaned back slightly, his eyes closing for a moment, as the night settled around him, calm, steady, real. Then he opened them again. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't looking backward. He was looking forward. If you've made it this far, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't just set you free. It shows you who you should have never been holding on to in the first place.